For the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack.
Gary, quit it. You're gonna start a howl.
I didn't start it.
Hello again, and welcome back to the series. I'm your host, and today we're looking at Disney Animation's The Jungle Book from 1967, the eighth and final film of their post-World War II era, known most commonly as the Silver Age, or as I like to call it, the era of Walt's final dreams. This script was written by Charmaine.
I do, however, have a head. It's attached to my body, it is me.
So thank you, Charmaine.
It'll still be me.
If you're new here, welcome for the first time of, I hope, many, and if you're returning, I thank you once again for your continued patronage. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into this together. As we always do with these videos, let us begin with a few words on the source material and how that came to the attention of Disney. Or at least, as I always try to. I don't know if I've always done it, but we try. Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book is an 1894 published collection of short stories, all centering around the animals and humans living in and around the jungles of India. The stories are fables or parables, stories meant to touch. Stories meant to touch.
No, definitely not.
Stories meant to teach, much like the works of Aesop. They are largely inspired by and based upon traditional Indian folklore and myth, taking inspiration from sources like the Panchatantra and the Jataka tales. Kipling meant these to be instructive stories, tales meant to teach children how the world works and the nature of behavior, the natural order and workings of society, all told through the personages of anthropomorphized animal characters like Shere Khan and Baloo. In the original text, Mowgli is far from the only protagonist presented, instead being one of several main characters that we get to know through Kipling's marvelous prose. It is a good deal darker and more mature than the Disney film would turn out to be, and is altogether a very different beast from the eventual movie adaptations, when taken as a work of art on its own. As with so many of their films from this era, such as Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, and Sleeping Beauty, Walt had first considered making an animated adaptation of Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book collection all the way back in the late 1930s, when he was considering what films to produce next, following up the success of Snow White. He ultimately decided against putting any plans for adapting the Kipling into motion, and it was not until the early 1960s when the idea would be floated again, this time by veteran Disney story man Bill Peet, who we have discussed in at least 4 or 5 videos at this point, and he is just an absolute legend. The rights to the stories were finally acquired by the company by April of 1962, by which time Peet had already drawn up a preliminary story treatment and a few initial character designs for the key players. Peet read and reread the Kipling originals over and over and over until he felt like he had adapted a story that was fittingly representative of the book's dark and mysterious tone. At the same time, he worked with songwriter Terry Gilkyson, who in turn had written a set of mostly brooding and eerie songs to go along with Peet's story vision. Peet had just come off masterminding the storyboards and scripts behind both 101 Dalmatians and The Sword and the Stone, back to back. He was in fact the first man ever, and still the only person ever, to storyboard and write the script for, entirely by himself, a Disney animated film, and he did it twice in a row. There was, by this point, nobody Walt placed as much trust in as he did Bill Peet, having put together the smash hit that was Dalmatians, and so, toward the end of the production of The Sword and the Stone, he sent Bill away to work once more on adapting another book into a script and a set of story sketches, with complete faith in his story man. After a few months, Bill returned with these initial sketches, and at first, Walt liked what he saw. However, in December 1963, Bill's second brainchild, The Sword and the Stone, would hit theaters, and it would not replicate 101 Dalmatians' mega-hit success. Although it was a modest success at the box office, making more than its budget back in North America and then even more overseas, the film was a critical failure, more so than maybe any Disney film had been up to that point outside of the wartime era, with many critics saying that it was somewhat aimless story-wise, looked scratchy, too scratchy for that matter, and overall lacked that old-timey Disney animation sparkle of purest magic.
Well, it's not very good, is it?
Nobody took these criticisms of The Sword and the Stone to heart more than Walt himself, especially since he had been somewhat critical of the film in the production stage as well, already saying, even before its release, that it was certainly not his favorite. And after these negative reviews for Sword appeared, Walt became far more critical of Peet's current, darker, more mature toned work on their upcoming Jungle Book project. Walt eventually became convinced that the Bill Peet and Terry Gilkyson vision would not work for a Disney version of the story, and demanded they change it to be lighter and less married to the source material. Bill Peet pretty much refused point blank,
Definitely not.
championing his and Gilkyson's darker take as the superior idea. They felt that Disney was ready for something a little bit darker and more mature. Both sides were utterly convinced that they were correct. This built up pressure in the production process until Walt remarked to Bill Peet himself that he should take a look at what the boys were doing over there with Mary Poppins, which was in production at the same time, and that Mary Poppins was real storytelling.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
Bill Peet took this comment very much to heart and retold it in his autobiography. He did not deign to answer it with something fittingly judgmental of Walt or his ideas. He held his tongue, and he later said in his autobiography that he was very, very happy he did so. However, with both sides convinced that they were correct about their take on the Jungle Book, something had to give, and after that conversation with Walt, that something was Bill Peet's employment.
They come back here. They're not abandoning us, are they?
They are threatening.
After almost 30 years at the Disney Company, from Snow White all the way up until the Jungle Book, Bill Peet split with his cantankerous employer, leaving to pursue his own artistic projects, like this book and all of these books on the table, and a bunch of other stuff he did, but a lot of it was writing children's books. Bill would later remark that he was pulling the weight of about 40 Disney employees from back in the Golden Age, what with him writing the stories, doing the storyboards, getting the dialogue recorded by the actors that Walt cast, with all the other higher-up employees and the official 9 Old Men Club members simply working on animation after the fact, so that it ended up with nearly all of the pre-production simply falling on one underthanked and undervalued man.
George's not even trying hard.
There's also a really memorable story in Bill Peet's autobiography of him talking about how he threatened to quit Disney early on when they wouldn't stop making him do just the in-between drawings for Donald Duck shorts, and that he just had a complete rage crash out one day and went up and down the halls of Disney screaming, "No more ducks, no more ducks," and he just was done with that crap. But yeah, he worked on features a lot more after that crash out. But Bill Peet was he could be a really fed up dude sometimes, and Walt could really make you fed up sometimes, and they had a very, very difficult relationship for about 30 years until that conversation about Mary Poppins as compared to the Jungle Book ended it. Whatever Bill's feelings on the cronyism or division of workload at Disney by the mid-1960s as opposed to the early 1940s, his dark, complex, more challenging tone was enough to cause a disagreement so strong that it led directly to him quitting the Disney company, never to return.
I quit! I quit! I quit!
Walt and Bill couldn't seem to reach agreement on the film's development, and the two of them, after all those years, broke up. Pete left the studio and never returned.
This sort of darker, more mature tone in a Disney animated feature would eventually be achieved by The Black Cauldron, 18 years later in 1985, a production which actually began in 1972, so the idea of a more mature Disney film was finally approved and given the go-ahead fully just 5 years after the release of The Jungle Book, which was the one that Bill had wanted to be darker. So it really didn't take that long to get that idea to take hold. Bill actually could have maybe just stuck around at the company for a little bit longer and gotten his dark movie greenlit, but oh well. Too bad, so sad. However, The Black Cauldron bombed, famously, almost sinking the entire animation division with it, whereas this film was a big hit. So perhaps a dark and somewhat scary tone truly was not what audiences expected nor wanted from Disney animation at this or perhaps any time. Black Cauldron's pretty cool, though. After this momentous parting of the ways between Walt and essentially his top writer ever, when you look at Walt's entire body of work that he released in his lifetime of the features, Bill Peet had the most to do with writing it all of any man ever. Walt turned to Larry Clemens to lighten up and suitably Disneyfy the story. Mr. Disney had just one very important thing to say to everyone now working on the new version of The Jungle Book.
Well, we were at this meeting, and the first thing Walt said, I remember, how many fellas have read the original Jungle Book story by Rudyard Kipling? And nobody said anything because nobody had read it. He says, good, I don't want you to read the book. Now here's the story.
The big man was determined that the original source material would not hamper or constrain his movie in any way, and so, after 2 straight films of letting Bill Peet do almost whatever he wanted, and in terms of adaptation being fairly faithful to both of the books he had just adapted, Walt was going to be a truly hands-on part of the filmmaking process for one, sadly, final time. The team worked, instead of from a finished Bill Peet script, like on Dalmatians and Sword in the Stone, this time from a loose outline, in small spurts of storyboard sketches and broad ideas from Clemens. This was to be another experimental film, looser, sillier, and with a jazzy, relaxed, almost improvisational feel. Very much like Alice in Wonderland before it, where story and structure mattered far, far less than characterization, style, and sheer fun.
And with that, he launched into a typical Walt Disney storyteller. He's a master storyteller, the greatest storyteller you've ever seen. He characterized every personality with his face and his movements and his gestures. And he launched into how he wanted to tell the story. And he says, but I want it to be fun. I want this to be a fun story, an adventure with fun. No mysterious, none of this heavy stuff. He looked at us and he said, and I want to have a little heart in it too, you know what I mean?
The casting of Phil Harris in this looser period of story development was especially key for the eventual overall feel of the film. Casting Phil, a famous TV and musical star and part of Walt's own social circle as Baloo the Bear, his first of 3 straight iconic supporting character roles for the company, was, like many of the big decisions in this production, a suggestion straight from Walt himself. While many of the Disney animators initially were pretty skeptical of casting a contemporary star like Harris in such a classic historical setting, as well as Harris himself being quite skeptical of the idea at first, not feeling that he really fit the Disney mold, Walt went with his gut, and the choice was truly a stroke of genius, as Phil Harris turned out to be one of the greatest voices that Disney animation has ever featured, as his 3 characters, Baloo, Thomas O'Malley, and Little John, have all endured as one of the most timeless and excellent features of each of their respective films. When Walt heard Harris audition, he was enraptured, and the tone of the rest of the film was set to match with Phil's personality and portrayal of the lovable bear. Indeed, it is fitting that the screen presence and performance of Baloo by Harris was the genesis of much of the rest of the project, for Walt was someone that had been, throughout his career, famed and celebrated for his ability to create and spot engaging and entertaining characters and people, and that was something that he was determined to make a focus of this film: characters. A project that would eventually turn out to be his farewell to the art of animation.
In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
This was the first time ever that Walt had really considered any form of celebrity casting in particular, other than maybe with Ukulele Ike in Pinocchio. Ukulele Ike! But with this project, having already cast the TV and music chart staple Phil Harris as Baloo, as well as the noted live-action Oscar-winning film actor George Sanders as Shere Khan, he went one step further, casting the fantastic singer and band leader Louie Prima as the great King Louie. At first, the idea had been to cast a different musical Louis Armstrong, as the orangutan king, before some at Disney became nervous that the decision to cast a black man as the voice of an ape might be considered racially insensitive, and as that was not at all their goal, they decided to offer the part to Louie Prima instead, another dude named Louie who had pretty much the same job and would also do an incredible job as he did. Much like Harris, Prima lent even more of a hip, happening, swingin' 60s feel to the project, and his interpretation of I Wanna Be Like You quickly became one of the film's primary set pieces and attractions. With Larry Clemens coming in to rewrite the former Peet project, Terry Gilkyson had to be replaced as songwriter too, and for this, Walt turned to a pair of brothers he had hired as staff songwriters in 1960, Richard and Robert Sherman, who had just impressed him so very much with their incredible work on Mary Poppins.
We had come across this song we had written for the animated version of Jungle Book called I Wanna Be Like You. It was for the ape to sing. The name Louie Prima came up. He was perfect for it. And he had a band. They played at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas. So we were sent there to play this song for Louie Prima about 4 a.m. And I'm singing and playing, ooh, 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 I wanna be like you, ooh, ooh. And they were just listening like a couple of university professors. And when I was through, he said, are you trying to make a monkey out of me? I said, no, you're the ape. These guys are the monkeys. And they all started to laugh. They loved it. When they play, they parade around, and the animators watched them doing that, and they actually did the sequence that way, where the band would follow around. It was very fun, and I'll never forget it.
The Sherman brothers eventually came up with an all-new soundtrack for the film, except for one track. The only Gilkyson song that would remain became The Bare Necessities, a song nobody could bear to cut, as it was simply so damn catchy, so infectious, and so perfect for the voice of Phil Harris that the single Gilkyson original was allowed to stay, mostly untouched. It must be noted just how very much Walt loved the Sherman brothers, visiting them often during working hours in this period, whenever he was feeling particularly down and needing some cheering up, and they would always oblige by singing him some songs, especially the numbers from Mary Poppins. The idea for the Vultures and their number was originally, very famously, to do the Birds' song to a Beatles-esque instrumentation, complete with a rock beat, and to have the Beatles themselves voice the Vultures, as a very knowing nod to them just being so dominant in the culture throughout the entire 1960s. However, after the idea of literally casting the 4 Beatles themselves to play the Vultures fell through, as I think part of it was that John Lennon didn't want to do an animated film at the time, which turned out to be rather silly, as he would about a year later do, well, he wouldn't exactly do it, but he would allow, all of them would allow the animated film Yellow Submarine to be made with their likenesses and voice-alikes, playing them very well, I might add, and making a little cameo at the end of the film on screen as themselves, and also allowing their songs to be used for it. So it's kind of odd that John Lennon and ergo all of the Beatles ended up not doing the Jungle Book, just because it would have been really cool. And they did an animated movie anyway of a sort after a fashion. So anyway, it's too bad. But After the idea of actually casting them fell through, they had to go for sound-alikes instead, and Walt got cold feet on the entire idea of a rock and roll number being in the film at all, feeling that a rock song might date the film to the 1960s excessively, making it far less timeless. Yes, Walt didn't think that rock music, or at least acid rock, was going to last at all. Instead, at the last moment, the decision was made to change the style of the song to the far more timeless arrangement of a traditional barbershop quartet.
Oops, I did it again. I played with your heart, got lost in the game. Oh, baby, baby.
So, Walt thought a barbershop quartet was going to be a heck of a lot more timeless sounding and relevant to modern audiences forever than acid rock, than the Beatles. Well, he wasn't always correct. You know, sometimes Bill Peet had a point, probably. A lot of the time. However, obviously, the allusion to the Beatles would remain, with the sound-alikes and the physical design of the vultures being reminiscent of the Beatles' haircuts. For the recording of I Wanna Be Like You, Prima came up with the nonsense sections of the song, with Phil Harris coming in later and making up his own nonsense responses.
Prima recorded the stuff by himself because Phil Harris wasn't able to make that session.
Sam Butera did the voice of that Baloo was going to do, and Louie Prima had that little spot there where he goes Scooby-Dooby-Doo, and then Sam Butera would say Scooby-Dooby-Doo, a-dee-ba-da-ba-da, a-dee-ba-da-ba-da, a-do-ba-do-ba-do. It was just aping back and forth. And when Phil Harris heard this temporary recording, he said, I don't sing like that. That's none of my words. I don't that kind of. So he was getting excited. He said, let me hear Louie and I'll do my answers. So you heard Scooby-Dooby-Doo. It was amazing.
While he was still on the project, Bill Peet had done some character sketches of his own, but these were largely discarded alongside his story treatment, although certain elements of Peet's character work did manage to make their way through in the end, as we can see from some of these sketches and just sort of the animals that were chosen to be portrayed and a little bit of the characterization. Just the tone of the story was massively changed. Now, however, instead of the departed Bill, the wonderful Ken Anderson was given the task of doing the new character design sketches, and to do so, he took direct inspiration from the voice actors themselves to make up the facial design of the characters, at least for Shere Khan, Kaa, and Baloo. Definitely George, Phil, and Sterling were the inspirations for those three facially, for sure. The casting of Mowgli was straightforward at first, but became tricky eventually, as young David Bailey was initially cast and began recording. However, when his voice deepened due to puberty far sooner than anyone had anticipated, the Disney staff had to improvise, and director Wolfgang Reitherman ended up solving the issue by once again casting his own son Bruce in the part of the man-cub. Young Bruce Reitherman had just come off voicing Christopher Robin in one of their Winnie the Pooh shorts, as well as being one of 3 young men to help finish voice work for Wart in The Sword and the Stone, and so he was by this point a well-trusted young talent in their stable of regular voice actors. This brings us neatly along to mentioning Bruce's father, director Wooly Reitherman.
They reacted with awe. Awe. I said awe. A-W-E.
Reitherman had risen through the ranks at Disney since starting there in the early 1930s on the Silly Symphonies line of shorts. His first assignment in a Disney animation feature was the face of the mirror in Snow White, and he became well known for his action animation, especially characters like Monstro the Whale in Pinocchio or the dinosaurs in Fantasia. Since he, like Bill Peet, was one of the younger members of the staff in the late 1930s, he, like Bill, was assigned to the B-team staffed Dumbo, in contrast to the older A-team staffed Bambi, and also worked on Saludos Amigos before entering the U.S. Air Force in 1941 after the United States joined the Second World War. Reitherman successfully flew missions until 1946, then retired from the military following the war, and immediately came back to his post at Disney, being next credited on Fun and Fancy Free. He then worked on every film Disney made, as well as a few shorts, from The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad in 1949 until he retired from animation in the late 1970s. Throughout the 1950s, he rose steadily through the ranks of the Disney hierarchy and emerged as a charismatic star, being looked to more and more in a leadership capacity throughout the post-war decade, culminating finally in his first feature directing credit for 101 Dalmatians in 1961, and then even more so for being the first man with sole directing credit for a Disney animation which he had for The Sword in the Stone in 1963. Interesting that Walt blamed Bill Peet so much more for the failure of The Sword in the Stone than he did Wooly Reitherman, but Walt certainly had his favorites. Throughout the 1960s, Reitherman went, despite the failure critically of The Sword in the Stone, which he directed solely. But anyway, throughout the 1960s, Reitherman went, at the beginning of the decade, from merely one of the 9 Old Men club members and one of the more influential voices within the division to, by the end of the decade, the director of 3 films, 2 of them huge hits, and the sole leader and creative director of all Disney animation, going forward into the 1970s. However, we will get to that final part in just a few more moments. I keep teasing it.
Foreshadowing.
With the job of directing once more solely his, it was down to Wolfgang to deal with all the personalities of the other remaining long-time animators working on the film. And this is a group that I'll go into much more detail on in another video entirely. It's something that I actually want to make a whole video on itself, is all of the people that worked on all of these films back then, and all the 9 Old Men, Ken Anderson, Bill Peet, Mary Blair, Ivan Earl, just the people that really had huge impact on all of the films under Walt. I want to go into all of their personalities and just discuss them in a video of its own. But anyway, this was a big group of crazy different personalities, and if you look at pictures of the animators back then, it's interesting that if you look at Wolfgang in particular, you really get a sense that he was a very big personality. He was a really tall guy. He had very tall hair. He just had a long face, very expressive. He made big motions with his body. He was just a big storyteller. You can feel big energy coming off of him, even in just the pictures of him. He's always making these really exaggerated faces for cartoony stuff that he's drawing. They all did that, but he's doing it just like so hard. Obviously, they all would use their own faces as inspiration. It was a wonderful old technique that they had. But yeah, Wolfgang Reitherman, you can really tell, is sort of a natural-born leader. And then, of course, he goes away and he becomes a war hero, and everybody respects him so much more when he comes back. He's now a veteran animator and a literal veteran, and just an Air Force, gun runner, just cool dude. This cool, tall, charismatic, handsome, confident dude. So yeah, Wolfgang Reitherman was always going to be a star no matter what he did. And there's a reason that he rose through the ranks of Disney. There's a reason that Disney himself, Walt, I think, gravitated towards Reitherman as a bit of a certainly a bit of a son figure to him. And yeah, there's a reason Wolfgang Reitherman did well. He was simply the type. And he was an incredibly talented man.
He has a sensual intelligence.
What is it with chicks and horses, huh?
Milt Kahl was another long-time animator and big visual mastermind behind this film, and very big personality, as with the tantrums he threw on 101 Dalmatians about not having his guidelines erased, doing at least preliminary animation on pretty much every single character in this film, before other animators either came in and took it from there, or simply cleaned up his work. But some of what Milt drew ended up in almost every single scene in the picture. Milt Kahl was just so skilled. Just like Wolfgang and Milt, 2 more members of the 9 Old Men on the project was the legendary best friend duo of Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. Frank and Ollie's legendary friendship drove this film more than almost any other element, the 2 of them eventually ending up doing around half of the animation on the entire project. or at least half of the character animation. They had met at 19 years old, working at the studio, and Frank and Ollie became inseparable from that point on, their ideas bouncing back and forth more seamlessly than any other two animators at Disney before or since, and their sense of cohesion and friendship truly shaping this film as much as Phil Harris' energy did, especially within the relationship of Mowgli and Baloo. As many talking about the film since its release have noted, in fact, Frank and Ollie basically were Mowgli and Baloo.
I think in a way the heart of the film rests on the work of two animators, which is Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, because together Frank and Ollie, two best friends themselves, who'd worked with Disney for many years.
Animated roughly half the movie between the two of them over the course of a very short span of time.
Their name is like one name, Frank and Ollie, and their offices were right next to each other. You would always see them in each other's office talking about an idea.
These drawings follow the section here where...
That looks good. Yeah, he's hopping up and down.
I said, keep it loose now. Be real loose.
For the ending, everyone was stumped for a while, as no conclusion seemed quite fitting. Finally, however, Walt himself had the idea of Mowgli after all the action had subsided, simply seeing a young girl, hearing her sing a song to herself, and being hopelessly entranced and enchanted by this unfamiliar and hypnotic vision. Many within Disney were skeptical of this idea at first, including Ollie Johnston himself, whose task it was to animate said ending. However, despite initially disagreeing with Walt, the more Ollie worked on the scene, the more and more it worked for him, until he fully fell in love with the scene and also wouldn't have the story end any other way.
Walt said, well, why not have the little girl from the village entice Mowgli? Ollie Johnston, who was supposed to animate that, was appalled. He thought that was a terrible ending.
The more he thought about it, the way he would do it, the more he really got into it and found a really sensitive way of doing that. You know, it's very casual and, I want to say, tasteful.
However, despite all of these creative strides being made by everyone in this period, tragedy was looming just on the horizon. After going to the doctor about some lingering pain in his neck that he thought might be due to an old polo injury, Walt was instead informed that he was suffering from advanced throat cancer due to his many decades of cigarette smoking and had only a few months left to live. A few weeks before his death, Walt had a meeting with Wolfgang Reitherman, who, with the departure of Bill Peet, had become, through the process of the making of this film, Walt's right hand and obvious successor. Without hesitation, Walt gave Wolfgang his blessing and confidence to lead the Disney Animation division after his passing.
There was an afternoon late in the course of Walt's illness when his end was imminent that he called my dad over to the hospital and explained to him that he wanted my dad to take over as the person who would take the full-length feature animated programs forward at the studio.
This, at the very least, gave Wolfgang himself and the rest of the staff the assurance that they would be moving forward in the way that Walt intended them to, even if he would not be there to see it anymore. On December 15th, 1966, in the company of a nurse who had by this time become a dear friend, Walter Elias Disney finally breathed his last and departed our mortal realm for good. In his wake, he left an animation studio and staff who, while all individually rocked to their cores by his passing, were nonetheless determined to make the old man proud just one more time. The death of Walt Disney had a profound effect on everything going forward, be it the films, the culture, or the people of the Disney company. His presence, his talent, and his warm personality had been something akin to real-life magic, and without it, everyone felt the loss, even those whose lives he had only touched ever so briefly.
The highlight of it all for me was I was in the middle of the session, and out of the corner of my eye, I look and I see a shadow of a figure that looks an awful lot like Walt Disney. And a few seconds later, the door opens and Mr. Disney steps into the room. And he waves at me and he says, "Hi, Clint." The memory of Walt Disney coming in and saying hi is something I'll never forget.
Walt was like a father figure to everybody. You just don't think father's ever going to get sick or ever certainly going to die.
He kind of summoned his strength and came back to pay that one last visit to the studio.
I was so grateful and glad to see him. I said, "Gee, it's good to see you, Walt." He said, "Ken, it's sure good to be here."
He was very thin and gaunt and grayed. I realized he's much sicker than I imagined.
He came into my office and sat down. He just wanted to talk. Matter of fact, in that chair in there, as a matter of fact. And then he walked down the hall and said goodbye. He never said goodbye to anybody in his life. Well, I'll see you next week or something.
Walt, whatever we may think of him in the modern day, meant a very great deal to the people who actually knew him. With the death of Walt, and his decision to hand off the duties of leading the animation division to Wolfgang Reitherman, this was truly the end of the first great era of Disney animation, the Walt Disney years. Usually his tenure is broken up into three distinct eras: Golden from 1937 to 42, Package from 1943 to 49, and Silver from 1950 to 1967. But in this case, let us view his entire works from 1937 to 67 as one continuous whole. They had released 18 theatrical animated films in his lifetime, and his 19th, The Jungle Book, would be the old man's posthumous love letter to the many audiences of the world who had grown to love his work. However, with the passing of Walt, the future of the animation division was in more jeopardy than it had been since the late 1940s. As for the higher-up executives that now solely controlled the company after the passing of its founder, they were unconvinced that Disney animation was necessary for the success of the company going into the future, and that perhaps the best decision might be to lay Disney Animation Features to rest alongside its namesake and creator, merely making money from the parks, the brand, merchandise, and other assorted products sold, and their only filmmaking being live action, which they had been doing throughout the 1950s and 60s. Basically, as was the situation with Cinderella before it, The Jungle Book had to do well at the box office, and not just well. Really, it had to make a killing. And in fact, perhaps even more so than Cinderella, because obviously Walt was still alive then, even if Cinderella had bombed. And also, in the late 1960s, they'd been making live-action films for almost 20 years. And so, if they wanted to just make those instead of animation, they had the history now to make that decision going forward. So this was super-duper key. And, unlike the unsuccessful Shere Khan, make a killing it most certainly did. Maybe it was the passing of Walt giving it some extra send-off magic. Maybe it was the fun, jazzy, easy-breezy, relaxed tone. Maybe it was that incredible soundtrack and the all-star cast. Maybe it was all of these factors and more. But whatever the cause, just under a year after Walt left this world, The Jungle Book opened to strong reviews and even stronger box office, earning its $4 million budget back many, many, many times over for the company. With a worldwide intake of $23.8 million in its initial run, The Jungle Book became easily the highest-grossing animated film ever up to that point, beating the high mark of $14 million set by Disney's own 101 Dalmatians just 6 years prior. If this movie had flopped, Disney Animation itself might have ended right then and there. But since it did turn out to be a massive hit, all those Disney executives and board members and remaining family members instead turned expectantly to Wolfgang and the other remaining animators, eagerly awaiting what they might next come up with on their own. Uncle Walt might sadly have been gone, but the future of the animation division at Disney was, at least for now, both justified and safe. Unless you were to choose to faithfully adapt a very particular individual story, there really is no perfect way to adapt a collection of short tales like The Jungle Book into a film script without it feeling, by the very nature of the source material, somewhat episodic. I think this observation fits this film particularly well, as the Disney version is a story that concerns itself with the idea that sometimes we must accept that we will never be able to change something or someone's inner nature, no matter how much we might desire to.
It's in your nature to destroy yourselves.
Yeah. Just as Mowgli must someday return to the village, so must this story, by its very nature, feel a bit disjointed and loose. There is a certain similarity in structure and at times in tone to Alice in Wonderland here, with the jungle being almost like a less nonsensical Wonderland, and all the many sets of zany characters Mowgli encounters, all talking animals, being not at all unlike the strange encounters had by Alice before him. They both enter another world, Alice first as a child and Mowgli as a baby, and then both leave it at the very end of their stories. Alice by forcing herself to wake up, even though Wonderland is canonically real, but still for some reason she wakes up at the end of the film. And Mowgli by walking into the village after the girl. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the weeds of an Alice theory right now. I'll just tell you about it in the big theory video that's eventually coming. But never mind that now.
But never mind that now.
Beyond comparisons to Alice, there is even more connection to both Sword in the Stone and Tarzan. The Sword in the Stone and The Jungle Book are two back-to-back Disney stories about growing up, maturing from a little boy into a young man, and everything that comes with that transition. Walt and Mowgli both have two distinctly different mentors in their story. Walt has the kooky, powerful, and musically inclined Merlin, followed by the grumpy, stuffy, old man owl with a heart of gold Archimedes, giving him his education together. Whereas Mowgli has the regal, exasperated, by-the-book Bagheera alongside the lovable, carefree, traveling musical vagabond Baloo, combining to show him what it means to be a man. Both boy protagonists of these mid-1960s releases were given extremely similar physical designs, almost one-to-one in certain ways, up to the point where some Wart animation is even reused for Mowgli in certain shots, like this one. And finally, both young men learn several specific lessons along the way that will help them in full manhood. Indeed, you could say that Mowgli tries out being several different animals throughout the film, from wolf at first, to elephant, to bear, to even a little bit vulture at the end, similar to how Wart is transformed into first a fish, then a squirrel, and then finally a bird in his story. These two tales mirror each other so beautifully, especially in how they utilize animals, their inherent personalities, and their unique physical attributes, that I've always associated these movies together in my mind, and now as an adult I kind of understand why, because there really are some very deep both story and setup and thematic similarities between The Sword in the Stone and The Jungle Book, as well as the art styles and the protagonists just being very, very similar, obviously, because they're Disney. As for Tarzan, the comparisons are even easier to see. Both Tarzan and Mowgli are orphan children, lost in the jungle and raised by a pack of animals, in one case wolves, the other gorillas. Gorillas. Gorillas! Both grow up to eventually realize the differences between themselves and the animals that raised them, leading them to question their place within the wild world in which they were raised. However, where Tarzan would eventually decide to stay in his jungle and embrace his inner gorilla, Gorillas! Mowgli, for his part, does the opposite, choosing to return to the man village and his place in the society of other humans. Indeed, it is easy and rather amusing to imagine a fully grown-up Mowgli, now in his human attire, journeying back into the jungle as an adult, just in another part of the world, and just so happening to cross paths with Tarzan, Jane, and the entire gorilla colony. Though the showdown between Mowgli and Shere Khan is teased consistently throughout the entire film, from the second scene onward, these two characters don't actually get to meet for their confrontation until over an hour into the film. This does make sense, as the second Shere Khan does eventually seize Mowgli, he is going to immediately try to kill him. It's on sight. But it also means that by the time the hero and the main villain of the story meet, there's only 12 minutes left to wrap up the entire narrative. This kind of works better in a nonsensical, just whatever happens film like Alice in Wonderland, but here it's sadly just a tiny bit of an awkwardly rushed dynamic between the two central characters of our story. Having a more developed dynamic between the hero and the main villain of a story is always something I am particularly fond of, and so the lack of a more developed dynamic or relationship at all here between these two is a little different from what I might usually prefer. However, the structure does allow for Shere Khan to be built up as an imposing, ever-looming threat throughout the entire storyline, and I do enjoy that aspect of it very much. He is sufficiently foretold, I would say. Overall, I see the story of The Jungle Book 1967 as one big metaphor for what it means to become a man. Mowgli has to leave the only home and family he's ever known, has to study under the tutelage of a wise mentor, gains friends along the way, some good influences and some bad, has to get himself out of jams when his friends and mentor aren't around to help, has to face a life or death situation against an impressively dangerous foe without anything but his wits and his bravery to help him in the fight, and finally, at the end of his journey of maturation and growth, his final decision is based not purely on himself, but on the premise of gaining the affection of someone else. In Mowgli's case, the little girl from the village. After his long walk is over and he has gotten that much closer to calling himself a man, Mowgli can finally see that there may just be a little bit more to life than simply wasting time with your animal friends all day among the trees, as enjoyable as that may be. In that final fateful moment by the water, Mowgli sees his entire potential future as a human being spread out before him, and he gladly walks toward it, accepting whatever fate may await him within his new, civilized world. It's a beautiful, bittersweet ending, and while I always disliked it quite a bit as a child, as I always just wanted the jungle adventure to continue with Baloo and Bagheera, now that Shere Khan wasn't a problem anymore, I definitely now, as an adult, understand why they went with this conclusion, and I think that me now, as a man understanding the point of the ending of The Jungle Book is the point of the end of The Jungle Book.
Sometimes a storyline that's too complicated can get in the way. Jungle Book had the simplest storyline ever.
I don't want to go back to the man village.
The storyline didn't get in the way of the characters, is the beauty of that little picture.
And with that, before we get into our main man Mowgli, we're going to take a little smoke break.
Hi. Down here. Hi. Hey. How's it going? I'm just about to start the recording. I'm probably pretty tired. It's a pretty long video, huh? See you later.
And we're back.
I want to stay in the jungle.
Huh?
Mowgli is kind of a whiny protagonist, I must admit. He's definitely at the will of the plot and of characters more powerful than him for most of the story, continually getting into trouble and having to be rescued, lacking much agency of his own for large swaths of the plot. He gets kidnapped, I think, at least 2 times, if not, if we want to be really technical, probably more than that. But he gets kidnapped by at least 2 different species of animals, and I may be forgetting something. Of course, he does eventually make many decisions and has to at least partially get himself out of trouble, but he is saved easily as much as he manages to save himself, if not more so. The use of multiple voice actors here is not nearly as noticeable as it was in The Sword in the Stone, and for their parts, the boys do well with what is at times a fairly difficult character to voice. As I said, Mowgli is a little whiny, certainly extremely immature, and can at times be a little hard to take for the audience. His journey and what it represents are quite a bit more important than Mowgli himself, which makes sense actually, given that Mowgli is not the main protagonist of the Jungle Book original. And that important journey is what the Disney writers and animators were able to nail, episodic as it is, I think. But I think that the story and the other characters are definitely a bit more classic elements than Mowgli himself. I do love to see how Mowgli interacts in such different ways with each of the zany animals around him. He is a pretty good audience surrogate blank slate, if nothing else. Playing with the wolves, arguing with Bagheera, befriending Baloo, being charmed by Louie, and ultimately doing battle with Shere Khan. But taken as a lead character on his own, he does tend to be a tad generic by Disney standards. He does have a particularly strong spirit at the end of the day, and is very resourceful and clever, but lacks the inherent irresistible charm of many of their other central characters. His design is good, but not all-time great visually, and he's a little too similar to other characters to really stand out as a striking Disney lead dynamically visually on his own. I like him fine, perfectly fine, quite a bit in fact, and he's a decent enough main character, but Mowgli is certainly not what people tend to emphasize when talking about their favorite parts or characters from this movie. He is at times fairly cute and charming, but of the many elements of this film that effortlessly stand out from the pack in the Disney canon, the protagonist is sadly not one of them.
You're going back to the man village right now.
Sebastian Cabot did marvelous work as the voice of Bagheera. Cabot had already appeared in several projects for Disney up to this point, lending his talents to the narration of both The Sword in the Stone and the Winnie the Pooh shorts, as well as providing the voice of Sir Ector, Wart's adoptive father in Sword. Cabot had a beautiful, full, unique, dignified, enormously masculine voice, with a certain truly majestic quality to it, halfway between Orson Welles and John Rhys Davies.
Ah, the French champagne.
And the character of Bagheera allows him to provide a far calmer and more tender performance than he was asked to perform for Sir Ector. Bagheera is a lovely, sleek, tranquil presence throughout this story. The only character who truly has Mowgli's best interests at heart, all of the time, completely unselfishly for the entirety of the story. He's the mature, responsible, emotionally even-keeled backbone uncle of the film, and his ability to be on at least decent relations with basically every other type of animal in the forest is both impressive and an insanely important asset to keep Mowgli safe. He reminds me in a way of sort of almost a Hagrid figure, where Hagrid is not a resident of the Forbidden Forest exactly in the Harry Potter series, but he does interact with basically all the main creatures in it and knows them all, knows everything almost that is in the forest, and is able to converse with the centaurs and have fantastic relations with the spiders and the acromantula. And he raises the herd of thestrals, and he does all of this stuff with all the different beasts. He brings Grop into the forest. Like, he just knows everything that goes on in there. He raises the herd of werewolf pups, I believe, in there, and so...
I shouldn't have said that. I should not have said that.
So Bagheera kind of reminds me of Hagrid in a way, just knowing all of the different factions of the jungle, but not actually being a part of any of them. Even though they're pretty different characters in characterization, they are similar in the roles they play within their stories. But at the same time, there's also a Hagrid quality to Baloo. So, yeah, both of these guys are the two sides of the Hagrid coin. The responsible, mature, and intelligent, knowledgeable man of the forest that is Bagheera, and the fun-loving, drunken uncle energy of Baloo make up Hagrid altogether. Bagheera basically seems to know everyone and everything going on within the jungle, at least to a certain extent, and he ends up coming off as an enormously intelligent and well-esteemed gentleman, which seems like exactly what Sebastian Cabot was himself. As a final note, his dynamic and eventually grudging friendship with Baloo is one of my favorite elements of this movie. Yeah, they're a fun, sort of odd couple, and by the end, them dancing off into the distance is a shot that I really, really love. The way that this movie ends visually, I just think is perfect, with Bagheera and Baloo walking off into the distance, just dancing together. And speaking of Baloo,
look for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities.
that brings us neatly along to talking again about the genesis for the energy of this project, Phil Harris' portrayal of Baloo the bear.
Walt said, "Why don't you get Phil Harris?" Well, this was sort of a new idea. It's a lot easier when you get a built-in personality that Harris brought to us.
I get this call, and they said, we want you to come out to the studio, and they said, we want you to play the part of the bear, Baloo, in Jungle Book. And I said, I can't do it. It just doesn't feel natural, and I left. About a week later, I get a call again. They said, Phil, Mr. Disney says that you're the guy he wants for that bear. Will you please try it again? And I said, well, do you mind if I do it the way I would do it? And they said, go ahead and try it. I said, look, kid, you keep fooling around in here with these animals like that monkey will eat you. You know, I mean, you get your roof knocked in.
Now I want you to keep circling or I'm gonna knock your roof in again. You better keep moving. Ooh.
And the guy said, that's exactly what we want.
As I mentioned in the introduction, Harris was already an established star of the radio waves and television screens of America by the late 1960s, in particular appearing many memorable times on the Dean Martin Show. He and Martin sharing a close personal friendship and producing many classic segments together.
One lump of sugar. Oh, Dean, you dog. You just give me one, kid. I'm driving. You know.
All right. You just sit there and sip.
Say, Mr. Martin.
Yeah?
Mr. Martin.
Yeah, baby.
It was nice of you to have me here tonight.
You gotta do a little every day. I always do mine while...
A little every day.
Yes, you gotta...
Keeps the doctor away. It's
sure?
better than eating the apples, baby.
Yes, sir. Mr. Clean by no means. King of the house.
Phil Harris had, no exaggeration, one of the greatest voices of any human being to ever walk planet Earth. He had, I mean, you've heard his voice a couple of times now already, and if you're watching this, you've probably seen The Jungle Book and his other performances for Disney, but yeah, he truly, truly did. He had a way of speaking that was at once warm and soft, strong yet gentle, genial yet mischievous, knowing and intelligent, but still casual and approachable. There's just something so indescribably intoxicating about the way he phrased things and delivered those phrasings, and it's impossible not to get wrapped up in his performance as if it was a big, fluffy bearskin rug. I love the way he says baby, especially. The way he says baby is just so like, chef's kiss, Phil Harris. Oh.
How's that?
You can bet me there ain't a lump in it, baby.
No lumps at all.
Phil had a voice like melted butter and an accent like the smoothest honey, and his run of 3 key supporting characters in 3 straight Disney animation features from 1967 through 1973 is well and truly legendary to this day. Harris as Baloo is the heart and soul of this film, providing the vocals to one of the studio's most iconic songs, and his chemistry with Mowgli, Bagheera, and King Louie completely carry the charm of the story. Baloo is one of the few supporting characters in Disney history that is on the level of, I would say, Robin Williams' performance as the genie in Aladdin, and from the moment he appears on screen, we all instantly fall in love with this most lovable of big, cuddly bears. In opposition to the rigid, stodgy, by-the-book Bagheera, Baloo is the fun-loving, freewheeling, bit of a bum uncle character trope taken to its logical extreme, what with him whiling away his days by simply wandering the jungle and doing whatever he pleases, all day, every day. He is an early example of the philosophy that we would eventually come to know as Hakuna Matata in The Lion King 1994, and Baloo, much like Timon and Pumbaa, truly does live with no worries for the rest of his days.
Ladies and gentlemen, my old pal, Mr. Phil Harris.
No, I can't be bothered with that. I have no time for that sort of nonsense.
As I mentioned earlier, it's a little odd how Shere Khan is name-dropped in only the second scene of the movie, less than 10 minutes in, and is referenced several more times throughout the film, his name coming up as a virtual ticking clock for the main characters whenever he is mentioned. However, Shere Khan himself doesn't actually appear until 47 minutes into a 78-minute film, and appears in only a few minutes of runtime altogether. For a character as fantastic, celebrated, and well-remembered as Shere Khan is, he has a shockingly small amount of actual screen time or active presence in the narrative. By the time he finally shows up, the vast majority of the story has been told, and he merely comes in during the final hour to act as Mowgli's final test of the jungle. He is, similar to the Queen of Hearts before him in Alice in Wonderland, a bit of a final boss to this film's slightly video game-esque narrative, being foreshadowed several times and worried about, but not being an actual problem at any point until the literal final battle, which kind of makes sense, because if they had met before, then Shere Khan just would have ripped him to shreds before, but you kind of have to keep them apart physically, which is something that they do differently in the Jungle Book 2016, where Mowgli and Shere Khan, I'm pretty sure, do have some interactions before the end of the film. The Jungle Book 2016 is an extremely different film, one of the most different of the remakes from the original, and a lot of people love that one. I think it's good. But honestly, going back to this one and reviewing this one, I have to say, I really, really do strongly prefer the Jungle Book 1967 to 2016. 2016 is good, but 67 knows exactly what it is. Whereas 2016 is doing its own thing, but also is trying to be 67 at the same time, whereas 67 is just 67. However, I will say the voice actors did great, especially Idris Elba as Shere Khan. He was fantastic. Shere Khan represents the ever-looming, always-present, uncomfortably deadly threats of the jungle at large. He is every large and powerful predator you might encounter, all rolled up into one handsome, sophisticated, seductive killer. George Sanders did superb work at bringing out Khan's obvious inherent nobility and sense of smug narcissism and self-satisfaction. He's a fascinatingly soft-voiced bad guy, as good at hiding silently and eavesdropping as he is at grilling and ultimately torturing information out of someone. Sander's own strong jaw, large chin, and strikingly bold features were perfect inspiration for the wonderfully clever face of Shere Khan, and overall he is a particularly well-written and memorable villain. He only gets one sung line at the very end of That's What Friends Are For, which was provided by Bill Lee rather than by Sanders himself. Bill Lee of Cruella de Vil singing fame, I'm pretty sure, and this one line sounds so nice that I rather wish Shere Khan had gotten an entire song of his own, but as he is a classic villain in the grand tradition of intelligent, witty, charming big bads released under Walt, in temperament and sophistication bringing to mind the likes of Lady Tremaine and Maleficent before him, as well as being a direct forerunner of Jeremy Irons' Scar in the future. Both big cat baddies are voiced with deliciously enjoyed villainy, each reveling in their tactics of evil, and so these two characters from very different eras of Disney feel completely in tune with one another. The main difference being that Scar and lions in general exist in prides, whereas Shere Khan and tigers on the whole tend to live somewhat lonely, mostly solitary lives on their own.
Kitty, 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 kitty.
Have 2 bananas.
After discarding the idea of casting Louis Armstrong for NAACP-fearing reasons, the switch to Louis Prima could not have been more of a masterstroke. Prima brings an infectious, grin-inducing energy to the role of the primate king, singing what is maybe my personal favorite song ever from a Disney film, I Wanna Be Like You, also known as the Monkey Song. It's just a work of genius, this song. The writing of it, the performing of it, holy heck. It's pretty much my number one. There's something about it. There's something about it.
Oh, ooby-doo, I wanna be like you.
This song was, of course, the entire reason for casting one of the real-life Louies, and the Sherman brothers were able to have an in-person meeting with Prima to show him the song and convince him to play the part, a meeting which ended up being pretty magical and memorable for everyone involved. Prima ended up recording the song with his own band, doing it in just a couple of takes, with Phil Harris, as mentioned earlier, coming in and improvising his own gibberish lyrics to match the gibberish that Louie had already recorded for the king. Prima is yet another voice from this film, dripping in natural charisma, character, and allure, charming the audience just as much as he does Mowgli, and making an eerily believable cult leader-esque figure within his jungle kingdom of servile monkey lackeys. He's intimidating, he's hilarious, and he's so very much fun every single second he's on screen. I love the way his movements are animated, his eyes rolling in his head, the way he dances, swings himself around by his arms, lopes around his environment with ease, singing of manhood and fire. Louie's Promethean request is, for me, the true high point of the entire film, as his chemistry with Mowgli works just as well as Baloo's and Bagheera's do, and King Louie, quite honestly, is a very strong candidate for best one-scene Disney character of all time. Yeah, just best cameo, pretty much. The fact that he has this much impact and cultural significance from a single scene and song in one film is utterly remarkable, and he reminds me of Tamatoa from Moana in terms of how much people love him based on a single scene and musical number. Although, of course, Tamatoa has since made other small appearances, but yeah, they still remind me of each other. And I also have to say that orangutans are one of my top 3 favorite animals of all time, and thinking about it now, actually, this scene is probably one of the reasons why. Very formative childhood movie was The Jungle Book, and especially this scene and this song. So yeah, King Louie is probably a big reason why I love orangutans, rather than my love for orangutans being a reason I love King Louie. It's probably the other way around, and he actually inspired it partially, now that I think about it. Louie Prima's performance is an utter delight, and King Louie continues to be the gold standard for single-scene characters as well as secondary villains in general in Disney animation movies.
What does it want?
It wants its physician's desk reference, if you don't mind.
The Disney animation and live-action staple J. Pat O'Malley returned once again, this time voicing both one of the buzzards as well as Colonel Hathi of the Elephant Brigade. O'Malley, as always, brings an adorable gruffness to the duffering old elephant patriarch, and his scenes are yet another highlight for the voice acting. The way Hathi interacts physically with his troops has always amused me, especially the way that he manages to give one fellow an impromptu haircut with his baton, which makes me laugh every single time. That literally made me laugh in the middle of saying that sentence, because it is hilarious. The elephants as a whole are seriously just comedy gold. Speaking of the elephants and longtime Disney animation staples, the marvelous Verna Felton voices her third Disney elephant here, after providing the vocals for both the matron elephant and Mrs. Jumbo in Dumbo, 26 years before this film in 1941. This role as the elephant matriarch Winifred would end up not only being her last Disney role, but also her last screen credit, as she would pass away on December 14th, 1966, just one day before Walt Disney himself. She had managed to appear in 6 different Disney animated classics over the course of her quarter-century association with the company. Thanks a lot, Verna. You were a legend. She's just always been an absolute favorite of mine. I really, really enjoy her work, especially in Sleeping Beauty as Flora. That's my favorite role of hers, but she was so great as the Queen of Hearts. She was so magical as the fairy godmother in Cinderella. Verna Felton was a voice that I grew up hearing over and over and over and over, so she's very special to me. So yeah, Jungle Book was really the end of an era in many ways and for many people. Rounding out the main cast in a trio of long-running and often used Disney voice acting talents, the original Winnie the Pooh, Sterling Holloway, was put forward by Walt's suggestion once more as his choice for Kaa, the hypnotic serpent. The Disney animators were initially skeptical that a voice associated with such a naturally kind character in Winnie the Pooh might not fit or be accepted by the audience as that of the treacherous snake, but Walt could see the vision early on, and eventually everyone once again came around to his way of thinking, and Holloway was able to play brilliantly against type as the creepy jungle snake, even getting an excellent villain song of his own in Trust in Me. The Jungle Book really is utterly spoiled for choice in terms of its excellent lineup of villains, as all 3 of Shere Khan, King Louie, and Kaa are memorably written, animated, and performed characters.
Walt came to me, and he was such a stickler for voices. He said, when you finished what you're doing today on Winnie the Pooh, he said, fiddle around and see what you can do with a snake. He said, I can't get the right voice. So I thought, wouldn't it be funny to have a snake with an aching back, because it would be such a long ache.
And finally, even though the amazingly bonkers original plan of having the actual Beatles play them fell through, the Vultures and their barbershop quartet number are still... Oh, Walt. are still a really fun and entertaining part of the film for me. It's probably the weakest element of an otherwise excellent film, this scene, as I always found the vultures to be where I got really sad watching the movie when I was a child. I mean, I suppose that makes sense, as it is obviously the emotional low point of Mowgli's story, but still, it always took me a little bit out of the movie, just how sort of sad and down this part of the movie gets. Maybe I'm just nitpicking, but yeah, it bugged me as a kid. I don't mind it so much as an adult, but it just really bummed me out as a child, this part. However, I think it goes a bit deeper than that, and I do think that this part is just a little bit sillier than everything else, as well as being sad, and perhaps sticks out a little bit because of that. Although I do still really enjoy the scene with the vultures at the same time at the end of the day. It could have been so much more, especially if they'd actually cast the Beatles themselves, but as it is, the vultures aren't too bad.
Out of my sight, you feathered fool!
The jungle in this film feels impenetrable, vast, mysterious, and disorienting in its sheer leafy mass. At times alive with the sounds of many loud monkeys or elephants or other such noisy clans, at other hours deathly quiet, except for the hum of the life force of 100,000 different clever animals, all dangerous in their own unique rights. There is a certain unnerving, at times downright scary quality to key moments in this film, and I attribute that more than anything to the stifling feeling of the jungle itself, coming off quite like the deep sea in how unknowably huge and full of unpredictable danger it must be. Mowgli's Odyssey is often light-hearted and carefree, but we as the audience are never allowed to forget just how many perils await him the moment he loses focus, whether it be a deceitful snake, an overzealous cadre of monkeys, a clumsy elephant herd, an ancient crumbling temple, a musically insane primate monarch, or a resourceful, ferocious, bloodthirsty tiger. Following 101 Dalmatians and The Sword in the Stone, The Jungle Book was the third consecutive Disney animated feature done entirely using the cheaper, faster Xerox process of transferring the animator sketches directly onto the cells to be photographed, eliminating the studio's traditional inking process of decades past. This era of Disney animation followed the failure of their all-time most expensive production, Sleeping Beauty, in 1959, and was marked by the need to cut costs wherever possible. And this became even more important when scrambling to try to finish this film in the months following the death of Walt. As part of the cost-cutting, and as a bit of a cute nod to the past, they began reusing past animation occasionally to fill out shots in certain scenes, slapping new character designs over old animation work and movements that had previously already been fully sketched out and completed. And some people absolutely hate the reused animation. I think it's kind of cute and charming, actually. I really like it, and it also helps some of my Disney theories, but yeah, it's a controversial technique, the reusing of old 2D animation. Disney Animation would continue to reuse bits and pieces of their old work here and there throughout the 1970s, but they would entirely abandon this practice with the switch in the 1980s from pure xerography and multi-plane camera-based cell animation to computer-based animation, and eventually the CAPS system of hybrid 2D and 3D elements. The Disney staff of artists hadn't had to learn to draw and then animate the movement types of this many species of different animals since all the way back in the 1940s when drawing Bambi, and so I must say that the body language for each and every animal really is so impressively observed by the animators and true to how their real-life animal counterparts move. The artists absolutely nailed the watchful trot of a wolf, the nubile slink of a panther, the pleasant lope of a bear, the winding slither of a snake, the earth-shaking stomp of an elephant, the comical swagger of an orangutan, and the deathly creep of a tiger. The scratchiness of the Xerox method once again works really well here, in my opinion, as the rougher aesthetic fits the jungle environment far better than it would many other settings, and the overwhelming experience of the animation staff by this point results in this film being yet another one of the most beautiful films produced by Disney under Walt. And if anyone's keeping track, that is 3 times in a row, 3 for 3, that I've said that the Xerox animation works really well for me, so even though I'm a huge fan of Sleeping Beauty and the look of it, I also really, really like the Scratchy movies too.
So this is what you were doing in the jungle.
One of the things I can say with absolute certainty about this film is that it has one of the greatest Disney soundtracks ever. Easily top 10 still to this day, and contains my pick for greatest individual Disney song of all time, or at least top 3, as I was talking about earlier in I Wanna Be Like You. It's probably my top pick though, and as well as that one, there is, of course, The Bare Necessities, another absolute banger Disney classic, and other all-timers as well, such as the hypnotic and sensuous Trust in Me, the gorgeously mysterious My Own Home, the memorably silly Colonel Hothy's March, and the adorably earnest That's What Friends Are For. There's not a single bad or even weak track here, and all styles of music and legendary singers employed lend a sense of vastness to this world, with each type of animal that sings a song singing in a nearly completely different style from every other, with only some similarities between the songs sung by the python and the human girl, both of these being slow, beguiling, hypnotic melodies, and those sung by the bear and the orangutan, with the two of these being what could be broadly called jazz and swing style numbers. Speaking of just this, the 1960s and early 70s was the period when Disney animation would become entirely enamored with jazz-infused numbers and scores, with there being a massive jazz influence in not only this film, but also throughout the score of 101 Dalmatians, 1961, and also with the track of Cruella de Vil itself, and then again in the Aristocats 1970, with again the score and the big marquee song, Everybody Wants to Be a Cat, with decades later, the company once more returning to a jazz-infused soundtrack for The Princess and the Frog in 2009. The Sherman brothers, Robert and Richard, did so tremendously well in contributing their songs to this film, what might even be considered their crowning achievement in their legendary dual tenure at Disney, at least for me personally, although probably a lot of people might say Mary Poppins, but for me it's The Jungle Book. These two brother songwriters had as much influence on the music and overall sound of Disney animation as just about anybody else in the history of the company, and this soundtrack in particular has a real case as representing their peak, with the all-time great I Wanna Be Like You glistening proudly as the magnificent central jewel in their metaphorical musical crown. Okay, I'm gonna shut up now about how much I love that song. Speaking of people that had a profound influence on the sound and music of Disney historically, George Bruns was back once again, and for his 4th of 6 consecutive Disney animation scores, from 1959 through 1973, and he had also done 1 before that, so he did 7 in all. He once again did terrific work on the background music here, with it being his splendid idea to make the melody to the song My Own Home the central musical theme of the entire film, being woven in and out of the score over and over until we finally hear it sung aloud, with words, by the young girl at the end. This was a brilliant decision, allowing both us in the audience and Mowgli the protagonist to be enchanted by the girls' song alongside each other, as we, the watchers of the movie, have just heard this same beautiful melody several times throughout the last hour. It's a perfect, clever little mental trick Bruns plays on us, making us feel as if we have somehow found our way home too, just as Mowgli now has, and it works perfectly to drive home the thematic impact of the story's end. And now, just before we get to the Critics Roundup, it's time for one more little smoke break, so we will be back after these short messages.
For the best combination of filter and good taste, Kent satisfies best.
And we're back. And now it's time for the Critics Roundup, which is the part of each of these D.E.A.R reviews where I like to take some time out and read you the rankings overall in the Disney canon and the blurb about the film from just about 26, I think, in this review's different reviewers, from YouTube videos of ranks of the Disney canon and from also online article ranks of the Disney canon, but basically 26 different people's rankings of all of the Disney movies, how many had come out when they made that ranking. And I tell you where this film placed, and I tell you what they had to say about it in brief, so without further ado, let's get into that section now. L.S. Mark, 20th, says it's pretty good, calls it very solid, likes Mowgli, loves Baloo and the villains, says the music is very memorable and that it feels like Disney's first true musical, likes the ending with Mowgli going to the village. Sean Chandler, 22nd, says that it's jam-packed with likable characters, great songs, and memorable sequences, but that the plot also feels thin, and that it ends up feeling like a bunch of admittedly excellent shorts simply strung together to form a singular whole, which holds it back from being top tier. Brian Hull, 4th, calls it S tier and one of his permanent top 5, says it's amazing and that he loves it very much. The Trove, 41st, says that the songs are memorable and the score is flawless, but that the ending is a bit nasty for him. However, calls the background paintings stunning. Modern Mouse, 18th, calls it A tier for him. The 90s Kid, 23rd, says he has a personal soft spot for it, loves both I Wanna Be Like You and the ending song especially. Justin Watches Movies, 6th, says that he absolutely loves all the characters and that this is a movie that always makes him smile. Likes all the elements, but especially loves the bond between Mowgli and Baloo. The Glad in Gladiator, 32nd, says that while it isn't quite as tight as 101 Dalmatians, it's so mesmerizing with its visuals and the episodic structure works so well for him that he thinks it is a masterpiece. It's interesting, he's calling one that he ranks 32nd a masterpiece, so the Glad in Gladiator just really thinks highly of Disney movies in general. Chris Aitua, 33rd, says that the characters are really fun and entertaining and the songs are even better, but that the storytelling is weak and that he doesn't love the ending. So yeah, the ending is very controversial, it seems. Maple Street Movies, 13th, says that it's great and that he loves it, that all the characters are amazing, but that Baloo is the best. Well, no argument there. The Movie Geek, 33rd. Shafrillas Productions, 39th, says he doesn't really like it very much overall, thinks the characters and voice acting is pretty good, but that the story is kind of non-existent. but that he absolutely loves the songs. Dave Lee Down Under, 6th, calls it lightning in a bottle good, says every element comes together and it's basically a perfect movie. That was the YouTube ranks, and now onto the online article critic ranks. Starting with Collider, 12th, calls it charming and bright, praises the songs but says it is sometimes a little too sweet. Paste Magazine, 11th, says that this might be the breeziest, most purely fun of all the Disney features. Between the fantastic voice cast, the unforgettable music, and the intoxicating charisma of Phil Harris's Baloo, The Jungle Book trades in the solemn imperialism of Rudyard Kipling's original stories for a jazzy, freewheeling joie de vivre. Film, 14th, says that in some ways the film is hit and miss based on which sequences work and which don't. But those that do are among the best in Disney's canon, such as Mowgli and the layabout Baloo singing the bare necessities, their run-in with the human-obsessed King Louie, and their encounter with a hypnotic snake. Hollywood.com, 4th, says that Disney disguises a collection of philosophers as woodland critters bouncing about in this wondrous, if not wholly reverent, adaptation of Rudyard Kipling's novel. Some of the merriest tunes any picture on the list has to offer. Screen Rant, 25th, says that The Jungle Book is fun from start to finish, with just the right amount of terror and menace in its villain, Shere Khan, and that the music in The Jungle Book is undoubtedly the catchiest of any Disney movie. Metacritic, 45th, says that the oft-praised animated musical boasts one of Disney's better soundtracks, with classic songs such as the Bare Necessities. They must have really disliked anything that wasn't the music then to put it 45th, when they say that it has one of the best soundtracks, but still only 45th. Like, geez Louise. Cinema Blend, 41st, says that The Jungle Book is a solid story, and the film actually has one of the better soundtracks, as many Disney musicals are lucky to have a single breakout song, and The Jungle Book has 3, Bare Necessities, I Wanna Be Like You, and Trust in Me, that have gone down in history. The Playlist, 2nd, says that its brilliance is such that not even subsequent revisionist takes, which have critiqued its racist and conservative overtones, can truly tarnish its legacy. Unshaved Mouse, 10th, says that Walt made many of the choices regarding characters and music that have made this movie the crowning achievement of the scratchy era. Feeling Animated, 31st, says that this is a fun, entertaining, and visually appealing film, and I don't think you can really ask any more of it than that. Darth Docking on Reddit, 21st. Rolling Stone, 49th, says that beyond some great scenes and Baloo, The Jungle Book is an undercooked story with retrograde politics that's far less than the sum of its parts. Oh my. And finally we have Lydia. We're adding my friend Lydia.
Lydia, oh Lydia, say have you met Lydia? Oh Lydia, the dance lady.
Friend of the channel, to the Critics Roundup permanently. She's joining us as the first third source, personal source addition to the Critics Roundup. So she'll be in each one, and Lydia and I are actually cooking up some scripts together for the channel, for videos. We're working on a very cool ranking video right now, which we've just been discussing the past few days, that you'll be seeing eventually. And we've already completed another that I just have to actually make into something. But yeah, Lydia is definitely going to be doing some co-writing some scripts for the channel in the future, and joining the Critics Roundup, and eventually you may even see Lydia on screen in some videos, perhaps in a deer, perhaps maybe even for the deer for Hercules, we shall see. But those are many, many fun things to come. But for now, we'll get Lydia's thoughts on The Jungle Book. 51st says that it is a movie she should love, but that is brought down by its obnoxious main character and awkward pacing. 6 out of 10. And if you'll notice, she was actually the lowest rank of all of the 26 rankers in the Critics Roundup today, so that was kind of funny. But not by that much. So a lot of people put it in the 40s. 26 reviews and rankings with an average ranking of just over 23rd overall. According to the collective Critics Roundup, putting it 7th out of 19 animated classics so far in our big ranking of the collective Critics Roundup together of the Disney animated classics. It was in 6 of the rankers' top 10s and in 0 rankers' bottom 10s, with a highest rank of 2nd overall and a lowest ranking of 51st, from, as I mentioned, Lydia. But there it is. It's doing pretty well in the rank overall. We shall see. I like this. I really like this ranking that we're developing with the Critics Roundup, averaged out. It's one of my favorite things to do each video. It's so fun. The Jungle Book 1967 is very rich indeed in thematic meaning. One of its primary themes is that of nature versus nurture as it pertains to Mowgli. Is he truly safe to remain living in the jungle into manhood, even though he was raised feral by a pack of wolves since babyhood? When his inherent human nature inevitably kicks in some form, will that include violence towards animals of the jungle, hunting them with cruelty perhaps, instead of peacefully continuing to coexist as he has since infancy? These are the questions that Shere Khan poses and then answers for everyone, as he is absolutely convinced that Mowgli will develop into an existential threat to the jungle, that this alarming possible eventuality is simply a matter of when, not if. This quandary becomes the basis for our entire plot and central conflict, and it is a fascinating thing to consider that the movie poses to us, the audience, as well as to the animal characters. And in fact, Mowgli does end up becoming at least partially a slave to his human nature, as his decision to follow the girl at the end of the movie is done far more in automatic instinct than it is in any sense of rational thought. He simply sees the beautiful girl and follows, as nature intended. However, just because Mowgli was always going to become a man one way or another, jungle or not, it does not automatically mean that he would ever have become as violent as his other more civilized human counterparts. Indeed, we need look no further than Disney's own Tarzan 1999 for an example of another character who, similarly raised by wild animals and brought up without the influence of other humans, chose to remain within his human sanctuary when faced with the choice between the natural world versus modern human society. Not only does Tarzan choose to stay, but he never becomes a threat to the many other animals of his environment, instead more often than not acting as a heroic protector, as well as being the leader of the gorilla clan by the story's end. As well as to Tarzan, I feel a certain similarity between this film and another set entirely in the bush, that being, of course, Bambi. As with Bambi, the jungle becomes a character of its own, just like the forest does in that earlier film, and just like in Bambi, there is a deep through line of preservation and of respect for nature and the natural order of things, running right into the heart of the Jungle Book. man's relationship with the natural world, and indeed the untamed world itself, untouched by our human intervention, are themes that Disney Animation has returned to many times over the years, and The Jungle Book 1967 is easily one of their most memorable meditations ever on these exceedingly worthwhile and timeless ponderances. I have always loved this era of Disney, personally, the 1950s and 1960s, their last era under Walt Disney himself. And this film acts as a beautiful swan song for the old man's days in charge. It is a silly, mysterious, lazy, hilarious, clever, jazzy, feel-good adventure story, full of great friends and even greater music, and animated by the absolute best in the business, still mostly at the height of their artistic powers. There's very little negative I can say about this one, and for myself, I love it very much. A well-deserved 9 out of 10. And that's it. Next week, we'll be back and discussing 1970s The Aristocats, so please do join me for that as well. This was a really fun one to work on. I had a really good time with this script, and so I really hope you enjoyed this, if you've made it this far. Thank you ever so much for watching, and if you're still here, good night, good luck, and enjoy the afterword.
That's all.